you. Plug it in or anything?
Nah, it's fully charged.
Okay. Here she is. All right. Okay, so welcome. We are, let's say who's here.
Jordan.
Rachel.
Sia. Sarah.
Sean.
Anna.
Nushi Long.
And Virginia. Hello, whoever is out there. Thanks to Rachel, we're able to record it without me going crazy trying to transfer things from an old form of recording to digital, which I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is go over the performance indicators. Have you all got your hard copies? If you haven't, I'm going to bring it up online. So this is has anybody managed to look at the website yet? No. So this is your website, all right? So let's back up again a little bit and let's look at the website. This is your introduction on the home page. And then here's the content page. Now, it's not telling us what to do every day. That is your itinerary, which you've got a copy of, right? But it's right here. So you can, check that out again. And then under that, you've got your 3 syllabi. And Rachel, the 601 and the 320 are pretty much the same, right? And then you've got your ESA guidelines. That's and it's not the same for Rachel as for the rest of you. This is a high stakes for you, right? Because it's going to be posted to your Chalk and Wire account when you've finished it. But for Rachel, it's just the process for the paper, right? And then you've got the rubric separated. It's in the guidelines, but I've separated it. There's a diagram which shows the research process. By the way, any of this, your little voice in your head said, please go over this before we leave. Just note it down and we'll go over it afterwards. This is how, again, the writing guidelines, they're all in those ESA guidelines, but I've separated it out, right? There is a piece about ethnographies, which when you're in the schools and you say, I don't know what to focus on and so on, this is just, in case you're not quite sure where to start, this is just some ideas for you. Then there's the field notes template. You need to either print out loads of these. Remember I went over it once on the board for you. I've made you a form, which I thought was useful. But if you're going to print out loads of these, then I would have several pages. Well, maybe only 4 pages in 4 days we're doing this. I would make one page, so this is in Word, so you can extend it, so you have a whole page of notes, right? So maybe 4 of them to take with you. And then, where are we now? And then here's some questions for the Study Abroad Dialogue, which came out of last year. It's pretty much like the performance indicator questions. You can have a look at those, but add some more of your own as you go along. This is your mapping template, which we need to go over and make sure you understand what you're doing with that. Now, I suggest that some of the stuff we not panic too much about. We'll have one session when we're over there, when you've got some notes to be working on, But we'll do a little today. Examples of maps, so you're not left bereft. I left in the midterm assessment. I guess that would mean when you get back from England, just write and tell me if there's anything you need or panicking about, what's worked so far, what you need from me before I leave you for 22 days or whatever it is, right, to finish everything off. The student leader, so you're going to research, and I told you this, you're going to research an article to help you make sense of your data for your paper, your final paper, and you're going to post your article on the discussion page here. You see where it says here, student leader articles, plus a short abstract of that article when you get back. The article should relate to what you're interested in the schools, so you can't look for it now, because you don't know yet, right? But when you are, you're going to find an article that will help you make sense of your data. And you do that through the library, do a search. You know how to do that? Katie, yes? No? Are you sure? You all know? Okay, so you want to look for for an article, and then you're going to do a short abstract. And I mean a paragraph. I don't mean a book. But this paragraph can go straight into your final paper. Elaborate on a little bit, because in the paper there is a piece that says literature review, and that's what this is. So when you do this, it's not going to waste, because it's going to be part of your final paper. Does that make sense? Sure? Okay. On this page 2 are your readings, right? So what did I say? Does anybody remember? I said Nieto, which you've got to read before you go. How many of you read it? Okay, you've got to read it before you go. Plus 4 more. So I've put up the ones that I think are great candidates. But when you go back to your content page, don't criticize me for putting up too much, please. I always put up more than you need. A hell of a lot more than you need, all right? So load more, okay? I'm not asking you to read them all. I'm giving you choices. Is that clear? So the ones that I am particularly fond of myself, that's Nieto. This is an analysis of Nieto that I did to help you to understand Nieto. The Moule article, I put that on the discussion page. This implicit association, that's not a reading, that's a test so that you can identify your biases. Nobody's going to give you a grade on that. That's just for you, all right? The Macintosh and the Maxwell, they're both articles about race, and a big part of what we're going to be doing over there is trying to understand race, this thing that keeps getting away from us, that people don't really understand. Spring, it's a marvelous thing about culture. Richley and Graves is about culturally responsive pedagogy, which you will understand by the end of this. This is the American Indian Studies packet. Now, you're not going to meet any Indigenous Americans when you're in England, but you will meet people who have been in a very similar situation in the countries from which they or their parents have come, right? So, and don't forget, in the performance indicator, there's going to be a bit about Indigenous Americans. Why? Because this course comes out of Act 31, which is about trying to understand the history of the relationship, what's the history of Indigenous people in Wisconsin and the relationship of Indigenous people from white settler descendants in Wisconsin. You've got to know this, right? Because when one of my briefs is to help you to understand this if you're going to become teachers. If I don't do that, then this course is not doing what it's mandated to do by law. So please read that. Whatever happens, even if you don't write notes on it, you have to read it, okay? And then there are other pieces. There's more resources on Act 31. There's a whole bunch of other stuff there. So let's make sure you've all heard, and whoever's at the end of this brilliant recording, I hope you heard this. You don't have to read all of these readings. You read as many as you do, but you have to do reading responses to Nieto plus 4. Nieto plus 4, Nieto plus 4, but you can read as much as you want. Okay? All right, go back to the content page and course information. And if you keep going on down here, so that's the student leader, that's the rubric for this. Here's the performance indicator. Do you remember that now? With the, yeah? Any of you need a printout of that before you go? You're going to be doing it online, but it's nice to have it in front of you. Okay, so I'll print it out for you. How many is that? 2? Just 2? 3? 4? Everybody? Maybe? Okay, so let's go, if it's all right, let's go through this. It says, the performance indicator is for you to reflect on how well you've understood the objectives of the course and what more you need to learn. if I were doing this and I were reflecting, because each one of these questions reflects an objective. So the first objective is to understand the unconscious mind, how we hold stuff, biases, all of us, right, hold biases in our unconscious mind that we're not aware of. Really important objective, first objective. If I were going to do that, I don't think I'd put it on a 5. Because I think there's always more that you need to know about yourself in this respect. So this is not about reaching a 5. It's about trying to understand the objectives and explaining what the question means and where you need to go, where you think you still need to go in order to get a higher point on that scale. Does that make sense? You're not going to get marked down if you only move 1 inch. Or maybe it is only a few inches here, one millimeter, right? If you move at all, it will be something. So please don't suddenly go, you know, oh, I'm going to get 5 points if I go up to a 5. I'm going to tell her I'm at a 5. I'm not at a 5. I wouldn't give myself a 5. Does that make sense? So please work online, all right, even if you've got this copy, and I think it's a good idea to have this with you when you go over to England in a hard copy. At the beginning of the semester, highlight the number on all of the scales from satisfactory to exemplary that reflects your level of learning. So when you leave here, and that goes for people listening in, please go through the scales and give yourself a highlight on each one of them. So if you read that question, what is the unconscious mind, how do you find ethical reasoning, and you say to yourself, hey, I'm at a 1, highlight the 1 now. Does that make sense? And you won't you won't do another highlight until you get back from England. All right? So if I were in your position, I probably would highlight a 1 or maybe a 2 because my grandma was this crazy psychoanalyst, so I had some idea about the unconscious mind. But that doesn't mean that I necessarily knew what was down below in mine, right? And then when you come back, say highlight yellow before I go and blue when I come back, something like that. Good? At the end of the semester, so when you come back again, repeat the process with a different highlighting color to reflect where you are after the course. Submit a key, so yellow beginning, green at the end, for example. This is an important exercise, so please take it seriously. Use the comment box. Do you see the comment box after each one? That'll expand again. To provide definitions of key concepts and answer the questions. So I'm expecting you to respond to those questions. And you can start as soon as you want, right? So the Moule article goes with that, number 1. You read the Moule article and you feel like you can begin to answer the question, begin to answer it. It doesn't matter when, right? It doesn't have to be after you get back. You can do this when you want to. I'm just thinking you'd have you'd know more when you get back. So I said, use the course readings to help with the process. You'll have time in class to talk and time in England class. You need strong answers to the questions for your strategic action at the end of the semester. So when we're in England and we meet with those other students, some of these questions will come up again. So you will need to have thought about, obviously not some, the one about Indigenous Americans probably won't come up, right? But some of the others will, like the one about parents or the one about multicultural education, which is basically about Nieto. The one about race will definitely come up, and social class and gender. I hope they all come up as part of our discussion. Then I also want you to do one thing here. It says, you'll also use the comment space to reflect on your effort and understanding. So, you know, where did I reach in terms of my understanding? To put it into words rather than just the scale. The most important thing you've learned about the subject. So you may still be on a 3, but what have you learned, right? And then what the barriers to understanding this subject area have been. One of the things, the barriers to understanding the first one is that if it's unconscious, how the hell do you find out what it is that's down there? And so we're going to talk about that in England, but just to give you one idea, one of the ways in which I tend to learn about the stuff that I do, that I don't think I do, because I think I'm this cool person who knows what she's doing, but half the time stuff comes out of my mouth, or I do that did that really come out of my mouth? Did I really say that? Because we're human, and we learn stuff, and we tend to relegate it, a lot of it, to our unconscious mind because it's part of our everyday life. It's practical, right? It's non-thinking behavior. Can be very dangerous. So we do something comes out, so immediately I have learned, say for example, I said something that is, I don't know, a judgment on religion or something like that, let's just say. And I hear myself saying, or even thinking something, and I will immediately say, oh my goodness, did that really come out of me? That's not the way I want to be in the world. And I'll say this with students, right? Because I think that's the way you stop it, is by realizing that it is a serious bias that could be harmful. And you have to interrupt it immediately and not wait for it to sort of fester. And somebody say, who is that woman? Why did she say that? You're interrupting it, right? Not waiting for someone else to. Does this make sense? That's only one way. There are lots of other ways, so you'll be thinking about that. And then there are multicultural competencies here. Do you see just underneath? Those are the different things that you're aiming for. Critical awareness and knowledge of self, others, and local, societal, and global communities. That's we're going over there to learn about that. Critical higher order thinking. You're all brilliant, so you probably won't need to do a lot of that, right? Right? Creativity, so going outside the box in terms of your thinking. Don't just be, you know, somebody who is led in terms of your ideas. Lead us. Go ready to lead us. Ethical reasoning. What is ethical reasoning, by the way? So it's in a sense, the opposite of your unconscious mind. So if your unconscious mind is what goes on outside of the consciousness that is given to you by your conscious mind, right? You're not aware of what's going on there. What do you think ethical reasoning is? If it's the opposite of that.
Where you like consciously know that you're having these biases or thoughts.
Exactly. And in order to know that, you've got to have a set of standards or criteria that you give yourself, right? Which you might know as your norms and your values. So if you're reasoning ethically, you're reasoning according to a set of ethical standards or norms or values, right? So if your unconscious mind, you only allow that to kick in when you're in a position to not reason ethically. So that might be, for example, when there is some kind of violence going on. And you don't have time to sit back in a nice way and say, okay, let me think reasonably about this now. You've got to act. It's at that point that your unconscious mind kicks in. Does that make sense? So if you don't know what's in your unconscious mind, the stuff that you do or say at that moment could be counter to what you really think you should do and say. And of course we know that very often in expression of some cops, for example, in a situation that is fraught with violence, potential violence, and difference in terms of what they normally live in their everyday lives, will act in a very problematic way. Others will not, because they don't have the same taken for granted biases that the first lot do have. See what I mean? They're not afraid in the same way because they have some knowledge of the context, and they're not going to just act according to fear and stereotype. Tell me if you want me to clarify that a little further, or does it make sense? Why some of us do stuff that's problematic and some of us don't. Don't be silent on me now, you're my crew. We're going over there, we've got to be able to say everything we need to each other. Do you want me to give you another example? can you give me an example in school? Give me a school example when it's so important to know what's in your unconscious mind. What could happen in a classroom?
One example could be you're talking to another student and something happens behind you and you turn around and maybe you assume it's like the troublemaker right away instead of somebody else.
Yeah, and we know from research that the tendency is for white teachers to turn around, and if it's a black and a white kid messing up, the tendency, not always, but the tendency is to assume that the black kid's the one who's done whatever is wrong. Right? And that's not what's borne out in research, right? The tendency is for kids to be equally problematic in circumstances like that, right? So if we know that about ourselves, then we can, before we go, we can stop and say, wait a minute, I gotta find out what's going on here. If we have time, first thing to do would be separate, right? All right, are we good? Because we're going to talk a lot about this when we're over there. Because there's lots of circumstances Patrick's going to tell you about at the school where he worked, which they're absolutely fraught with this stuff. But it's a good example, I think. Applying multicultural theory to practice, so that's really Nieto. Evidencing your ideas with detail and clarity, which means you've got to talk, which means you can't look at me, you can't leave me out there dripping wet on the clothesline, right? You've got to contribute. And then referencing the authors of the ideas you share. So whatever you read, whether it's stuff I've given you, it comes from somewhere else, you've got to help us by referencing what you've read. All right, so questions about that. Do you want me to go through these questions? Just look at them quickly. Because the second one is a really good one for you. What is culture shock? What is culture shock? Because you might have it in a minute.
It's kind of like when you go to a culture that's different from the one that you were raised up in. You don't like it because you don't understand it.
Yeah. It's not, it is about emotions, and life is about emotions, but the thing is, you go into a country, you're not going to a place where you don't completely misunderstand people, because you do know English. It's just that sometimes the English that people speak over there, same words, doesn't mean the same thing. So be aware of that, right? And sometimes accent can get you. I mean, even my accent gets you sometimes. So it's when your familiar cultural markers have moved. They're not where you thought they should be, right? And what that tends to do to us, it throws us emotionally into a very difficult space. And there is a handout, which I think I went over with you once. If not, then we need to go over it when we're over there. There's a handout online which shows this trajectory that happens to you when you're in culture shock. You disintegrate, and then you get really rebellious and angry, and then you begin to recover. But you need to know before you leave that you will recover. You do adapt, right? Whether it's Ireland or England or France, which is possibly worse because it's a really different language, right? And remember, the French will love you if you try to speak their language. So shall I teach you 4 different phrases before you leave here?
Sure.
Okay, well, let's do it now. Okay, how do you say hello in French?
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Yes, bonjour. Say bonjour.
Bonjour.
Okay. How do you say goodbye?
Au revoir.
Au revoir. Exactly. Au revoir. Say au revoir. Au revoir. I write them up there. How do you say thank you?
Merci.
Merci. Yes. Merci. All right. How do you say how are you?
Comment allez-vous?
You could say comment allez-vous, which is very formal, or you could just say comment ça va, which means how's it going, right? Comment ça va. And then what about ordering in a restaurant? Okay, so you don't, I'm not going to go through all the stuff that's possibly on the menu, but if you're ordering something, you want to say je voudrais, which means I would like. So what have I just written down, okay? Because this is good. Avoid getting nasty to you, right? So, bonjour and au revoir. Merci. What else did I say do?
Comment ça va?
Comment ça va? Oh, and then you would say, I'm fine. Ça va bien. Merci. I'm fine, thanks. And then, je voudrais. And I think that's enough to get you by. All right? Bonjour means
Hello.
hello. Au revoir means
Goodbye.
bye. Merci means
Thanks.
thank you, thanks. Comment ça va means
How are you?
how are you? Ça va bien, merci means
I'm good, thanks.
I'm fine, I'm thanks, I'm good. And je voudrais, I would like. Je voudrais le pizza. Oh, je voudrais le sandwich. Or whatever it is that you want to eat. Okay. So expect that you're likely to go, oh, what are we doing here? And then it'll get better. And if you know this, it'll help so much. This is one you've got to do. You're going to describe cultural differences, contributions, lifestyle. You're going to have to ask. You have such a short time. You've got to go there knowing that you're going to have to attack and ask questions politely, right? Now, they'll all speak English. So it's not a question of you having to get through stuff, but you've got to find out about them as much as you possibly can. And a lot of them will come from somewhere else. One of the days we're going to go to a school, and they're going to literally put on a whole show for us. We didn't ask for it, but I think that's going to be quite useful. I don't mean, bells and whistles, but I mean they're going to show us around and do all this stuff. Anyway, this one's about Nieto, so you've got to know about Nieto. By the way, I do have some examples of the performance indicators. I'm going to print out a couple and bring them with me to England, so that you can just look at it. These were done by graduates, so they're pretty hot stuff, right? But doesn't mean that you all can't do your own hot stuff too. And then the next one's about parents, so you're going to have to ask about their parents' relationships with the schools, right? With family and consumer studies, no, it's not, it's HDFS, isn't it? Human, isn't that what you are?
Me?
Human.
I'm family consumer
Oh,
science.
you are family.
Yep.
So this is a good one for you. Then colonialism and neo-colonialism. So this is where I want to go in a minute. I don't want to do too much talking, but these are the concepts that I think are going to be most difficult for you. So as you're listening to this, say, gosh, I need her to go over that, or gosh, I need her to go over that. Racism and whiteness, I think we need to go over that before we go. Gender identity, gender expression, again, there are handouts about these online, so please go and look at those. But gender you might be a little bit more comfortable with than social class than some of the others. Cultural hegemony, I think that's another one, right? We need to go over. Equity and equal education. What's the difference between equity and equality?
Equality is everyone gets the same thing, and equity is everyone gets what they need.
Oh, remember. Good. This is the tribal one, the tribal history, sovereignty, tribal treaty rights, and so on. That's the one that we're not going to be talking about over there. You have to do your own research. And the religious diversity, you're going to meet a lot of people who are Muslim over there. We're going to go to a mosque. We're going to have a dinner in the mosque. It's going to be pretty good. And I think we're going to be meeting somewhere else in a temple, a Hindu temple too. So we're definitely going to learn about some different religions while we're over there. the thing that's going to be so different for you is that it's not against the unwritten constitution in the UK to talk about religion in schools. It's perfectly fine. Proselytizing is not good. Do you know what I mean by that? Trying to convince somebody that your religion is the right one. You don't do that, but you do talk about what it includes. They have scripture, which is about trying to understand the religions of different people. I personally think that's a damn good idea, because we don't know. You know, you guys going over there, you don't know. Unless you're brilliant, you don't know about Islam, right? You know what these assholes are doing out there, but that's not Islam. That's some kind of misguided, crazy, unforgivable acts of violence, right? So we're going to talk, obviously, a lot about that while we're over there. And then critical multiculturalism, note this, it's the highest level of NATO. It's affirmation, solidarity, and critique. It's not a new idea. It's in NATO at the top level. Okay? So, how many of you want me to print this out for them? Because while we're doing that, I want you to think about what you would like me to explain, apart from the three that I've noted: colonialism and neo-colonialism, race, racism and whiteness, and cultural hegemony. Any others that came up for you there? No? How many of you want me to print this out? Shall I just do it for everybody? Do you think those folks over there, how many are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Do you think those folks online, do you think you all could please let me know that you've got a performance indicator? Please, and email me if you don't. It's online, but I can always email it to you. I'll just go and get this.
Hello. Is this still recording?
Yeah, I just checked it. Yeah, and it like shows the line as you talk. So when she's like yelling at it, it like will go.
This would be really hard to follow without the screen.
Yeah.
She should have done like a screen recording and emailed it to him.
I know I would listen to it and be like, what?
It's better than nothing though.
Yeah. If you're listening, we're looking at the performance indicator. Just go through all of D2L. You'll be good.
Every single thing.
That's what I'm gonna do.
Pretty much.
Just gonna make sure I know everything.
Well, and it looks like a lot, but it's just like, okay, these three things are all in the same one, but here's it more times.
Yeah, that was my favorite. These are all the same, but yeah, there's 15.
It's too nice to be inside.
I know. Do you guys know how long we'll be here?
No idea.
I assumed like an hour and a half, because that's kind of what the other ones have done.
I have to leave at 3.
If we all just stand up and leave at 3. Doesn't say anything.
Gotta go, it's nice outside.
weekend when it was so hot, where I work, the heat wouldn't turn off. So our air and our heat were both constantly running, and I work under the heating vent. That was fun.
Where do you work?
I work at Dick's Fresh Market, grocery store.
Wow.
It's awful.
So, can I give you that? Just give me two. One.
I was gonna get the pen, so there we go.
It's not gonna look the prettiest, but it's okay.
Right, these are your, you want to hand them, so these are your assignments for 3, I just took them out of the syllabus, okay? We'll go with these in a minute. Okay, so.
I have to leave at 3.
Have to leave it. Uh-oh, quick. So you need to claim what you need us to go over.
Oh, yeah, I don't really care. I'm good.
Were there any more of those, or was that, did I do that number?
I think so.
Okay. We're gonna have to share if we're gonna go. Okay, so colonialism, all right? So what it is that the first one we should do? Yes, agreed?
Sure.
So what is colonialism? By the way, I've left the PowerPoints for the summer school online, so you can look at them, right, and see what we went over for summer school this summer. They're all under PowerPoints online, so that might be helpful. And there's stuff about colonialism up there too, definitions. What is colonialism? Remember, this country was colonized by who? British, exactly. And you're right to say the English because they were the top dogs over there. So what exactly did they do when they got here?
They created colonies.
And what does that mean exactly?
Some type of government with a little bit of strategy.
Yeah, so they sort of set up their own functional, sort of functional communities, right? But how did they get there? How did they do that in the first place? Did they just walk in and it happened, or?
Became buddies with Native Americans and then said, see ya.
So you
His
have
buddy
to have
buddy.
military might for colonialism, right? You've got to have some military might, and then you've got to have a cultural agenda that you then impose on the people. And you're right. I mean, that was a pretty egregious history, right? Which we will go into, and you'll notice how familiar that is in other parts of the world as well. Now, neo-colonialism is clearly not colonialism. It's it's nearly, right? And what essentially that means is once that colonial period has established itself, the relationships between the dominant and the not dominant are kept going by certain cultural policies, right? So you have to, when you're in this country, for example, you go into school and you realize this neo-colonial, even though we take it for granted as normal, natural and common sense, is neo-colonial in the sense that whose language is being used? It's not an indigenous language, right? It's English, so it's been established, right? And then you have to look at the different ways, the norms and the values. Whose are they? Who are they? Whose norms and values have been established? The other thing is, what suits, no, which group is being suited best by the ways in which children are being educated these days? Is it equitable in the sense that it's meeting everybody's needs? Or is it equal in the sense that everybody's getting it, but some people are not suited to it, and therefore they're being left behind? Am I making sense? So that's a form of neocolonialism, right? I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying is, right? And then you might say, well, it's ridiculous to even remotely suggest that we have more than one language in schools today. But Switzerland, for example, 4 languages. You know, I mean, there are parts of the world where languages are much more liberally distributed than in the United States. And then you have to ask yourself, well, why is that? Why are people so paranoid about different languages? Well, in the US, it's not a standard practice either, because there are some amazing bilingual schools, right? Where kids will go in, and from day one, they will, the project will be that by the time they graduate, they will be fully bilingual in at least 2 languages, whether it's English and Spanish or English and Mandarin or whatever language it is. So this country is never standard in the sense of what people expect. It's always diversity in practice. But when I say neocolonial, I mean the general practice. You know, what tends to be the norm is, I think, left over from certain and we don't see it like that because it's normal and natural and common sense. Am I making sense? It's going to find exactly the same thing in England, exactly the same thing in France, exactly. Although, so you could argue it's a little different there because the colonialism in England was from such a long time ago. But still, you know, it's still there. And a lot of the kids who are in there come from former colonies, and what they find in England doesn't suit them. Right? Cultural hegemony totally relates to that. Cultural hegemony is the process. It's a process now. It's not a state. It's a process whereby we're persuaded to take for granted those neo-colonial practices. So I always give this little example. I don't know how good it is, but I think it's fairly reasonable. You know Nike? You know the just do it logo? So I'm not suggesting this is true for you, but I know it was true for my youngest daughter, who is now, she's 30, and she's got a baby, and she's, you know, she's doing fine in the world. She's got a very nice husband, thank God. And in California, she's a therapist, and marriage and family therapist, and absolutely fine, and everything is wonderful and everything. But when she was, where am I going with this? I completely lost my train of thought now. That's it. When she was, I would say 10, we had the most awful fight. Because she came home one day and she said, I just, you know, was with my friends and we passed the store and I saw these shoes and I must have them. And I said, there's no must in this, I'm afraid. What are you talking about? So she said, she was this pair of Nike shoes. I mean, she absolutely had to have them. They were $120. I mean, that's a while ago, right? That's like 20 years ago. Maybe she was 12. Anyway, I persuaded her after a long, really sort of knockdown, drag-out fight to have the much cheaper pair, which was probably like $29 or something like that. What she didn't realize at the time was that even though you might give me an argument on this, there are a lot of much cheaper pairs that are just as good. Some of them are not very nice, but there are a lot of them that are really just as good. But she had been persuaded by the corporate monster that she had to have these shoes because of the meaning associated with the shoes, right? That if you wore these shoes, you're going to be a great athlete, you're going to be able to just do it, and so on and so forth, right? The other piece that they don't do when they try to persuade you to go along with their agenda in order to buy their product is what is behind the scenes. because even though I think things have changed just a little bit, not enough, because they actually produce these shoes in countries where they pay the workers very little money to produce them, so that the profit is huge. And we know it's not just Nike. It would be unfair to say it's just Nike. We know that that's part of the discussion in the public at the moment about offshoring different industries, right, and making the corporate body makes the profit, and they're not even necessarily, they don't necessarily even have some of their main offices here, right? They might be in somewhere in the Cayman Islands where they don't have to pay any taxes and so on. So we know that's going on, and we know it's problematic, and we know as teachers and counsellors and so on that we don't want that for our kids. What don't we want for our kids? We don't want them to be persuaded that these policies and practices that come down from on high should be taken for granted as normal and natural and common sense. We can create the society we want to live in, and it should be more equitable. Because when you've got poor people saying, I have to have those shoes, it's bloody ridiculous, right? I mean, even, you know, the most fabulously wealthy people, I would say, they shouldn't be duped either, you know. But certainly it's really unfair for some of these folks who haven't got any money to think that the only way they can be valuable in the world is to have a pair of shoes like that. So that's an example of cultural hegemony. It's that persuasion, that way of, use the word persuasion, is how we get persuaded that policies and practices that aren't in our interest are normal and natural and common sense. So then you have to ask yourself, what goes on in school that is not necessarily in the student's interest, that they are persuaded to see as normal and natural and common sense? You might say, I don't see anything, but when you're in England, it's going to be much easier for you to see stuff than over here, because this is your territory and we tend to take for granted what's around us. But when we go somewhere different, we tend to see things. Does that make sense? So like, for example, some of the curricula that you see when you're over there, you might say, this is really weird. I'll just give you an example. When I did some research in a school, that's one of the schools we're going to go to, I was really quite impressed because they were having these discussions about race and racism and so on, and I thought, wow, you know, don't see that very much in the United States. That's fantastic. I'm really impressed. So I was talking to the teacher afterwards, and I said, I'm really impressed, you know, that these are equivalent of ninth graders, and they're having these wonderful conversations. She said, wait a minute, before you go any further, she said, yes, we're talking about race in the United States, but we're not looking at British colonialism and the experience that the kids who actually live here have had in the journey to get here, right? Happened for their parents and their grandparents back in India, for example, and now they're here, and we don't even talk about their experience in the UK. Interesting, right? Because it seemed so cool, because I was like, oh, you know, I'd like to see more of these conversations in the US. But they're only talking about the US, because it does nothing to disrupt the UK if you're just talking about the US. More, call me or something like that. Thanks for coming. See you soon. So does that kind of make sense? Again, it's a process of persuasion. You get persuaded to something that's not necessarily in your interest. Don't start seeing this under every bed, because I'm not saying that. And I am saying that there's stuff out there that can be problematic. It might not be for you, but it might be for some of the kids in the school. And our business is for everybody. It's not just for a few, not just for the ones for whom it works, right? It's a lot of stuff that happens here works for maybe even the majority, but doesn't work for everybody. So that's the issue. And the third one is race, racism, and whiteness. So this is how I prefer to look at this. You may not get this. Imagine this is a coin. And there are two sides of this coin. One is racism, one is whiteness. And this coin is a system. I'm not talking about individuals. You have to put that head now. This is not about individuals. Race is a system. Right? Racism is part of a system. Whiteness is part of a system. So if Sean, for example, you're a white man, we're not talking about you as an individual here. Okay? That's very hard sometimes for people to get because they think you're targeting me. No. It's about the legacy from colonialism to about a system. So within that system, some people benefit more than others, but they're not necessarily asking for it. Right? They're not necessarily consciously perpetuating it. It's the system that they are a part of. I get more benefit than, in some areas, I get more benefit than you, Nushnam, because at least I look like a white woman, right? But in other areas, change context. As a man, it's possible, in certain contexts, that you get more benefit than me. I'm not sure that I can really think of one right now, but still, that's theoretically good. And say, for example, I am a poor woman and you are a rich man. Social class would also play a role in that. But we're not talking about that at the moment, we're talking about race. Okay, so what is race then, if it's a system? Is this something that you haven't been asked to define before? No? A little bit?
Yeah, a little bit.
What did you get?
Well, I took a class in undergrad that was
Yeah.
the psychology of racism,
Yeah.
stereotyping, and prejudice.
Yeah.
And basically, kind of the big thing that ended up being is that race is a social construct. It's something that's biological. It's kind of like gender, like it's a social
Right.
construct. So
So when yeah, go ahead.
We did something like this in my lifespan
Hmm.
human development class
Yeah.
last semester, and it was like a
Was that with
discussion.
Terry Karras?
What?
Was it with Terry Karras?
No,
Oh.
that's Beth Ann
Okay.
Schreiner.
Yeah.
But anyways, we did a discussion on if we think that children, like if babies are born racist or
Right.
not, and they did like an experiment on it, like with dolls and
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
you know.
The doll studies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we talked about that a little
Yeah.
bit in one of my classes too.
Yeah, they learn very early this stuff.
Mhm.
They learn about the system very early,
Yeah.
but they see difference, but it doesn't have to be negative the way
Mhm.
people interpret it. We all see difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when something's a social construct, it's for a purpose. What was the purpose for which race was constructed? That's the crucial bit for you to get. Because it's part of cultural hegemony.
I mean, part of it's like who is kind of like part of your tribe, or like part of your, like who belongs with you and who doesn't.
Yeah, not ethnicity, so I've got to get this straight too. This is more about your quote-unquote tribe, right? And that fits in with this, but it isn't the same thing. So here's what I understand. Back in the 17th century, the leaders of this country, the very small, beginning corporate people, I'm thinking about the South, I'm thinking about Virginia now, needed to have a workforce. You have to go back and remember that the top dogs in those days didn't work. Up until fairly recently, if you were a gentleman or you were a leader of industry, people worked for you. You did not work, right? Very important to understand that concept. So these guys, even today, the corporate folks, they would not have done the work for themselves. They would have got other people to do it. Now, back in England, it would have been quote unquote, because white didn't exist as an idea back then, but it would have been the working class Englishman or Irishman or whatever who did the dirty work for them, right? It's the same idea as Plato's Republic, where you had different types of people in society. And back then, the idea was you could never really move from one group, from one caste to another, just like in India, right? So they tried when they were over there. The Englishmen were dying because they couldn't tolerate the heat. They couldn't do the work in that context. I mean, look at, wet old England compared with, you know, what it was like down there, really, really hot and miserable for them. So, so they tried, after a lot of people had died, as you know from your history, they tried enslaving indigenous people to do the work, and they kept getting out of Dodge because they knew the territory. And eventually, starting with the Portuguese, and that happened in Brazil, they got the idea that if they took people from Africa and took them, and they got a certain amount of agreement from indigenous Africans, because they used to enslave people there too, not in the same way. It wasn't chattel slavery. You could be enslaved there and then get released and even become a leader in that country. But the idea was, we can take these folks, take them over to Brazil, take them over to wherever, and they can work for us. And if we're clever enough, we can divide and rule them, right? They come from different communities, they'll speak different languages, we can take away their cultural artifacts, we can make sure they don't marry, and so on and so forth, and we can literally control them. And of course, that's what they did. But the problem was they had to convince the white population that they shouldn't hang out with these guys, that they shouldn't be friends. Because if they were, prior to them realizing that this was going to actually work for them, they were having babies together, they were hanging out, they were even part of revolutions against the elite, because they didn't want to be treated like they were pieces of shit either, right? So what they ended up doing, if you look at the law at the end of the 17th century, is giving those white workers a little, you know, a few carrots in order to persuade them that they were better than the Africans. If they were successful in doing that, putting them on slave patrol, giving them 50 acres of land, giving them a little bit of money, they could successfully divide and rule, right? And convince them that they were better than the African people, and then they'd set up this system of race. Because prior to that, there was no concept of race. Certainly there was ideas of difference. We look different, right? But not that different. I mean, there's gradations of color, there's different leg length, there's different types of hair, there's a whole bunch of differences that don't just go along with skin. If you go to Africa, there is no such thing as race, right? There's no gene in this group that you call black that doesn't exist in this group that you call white. And if the race existed, you'd have to have a clear-cut biological differentiation. It doesn't exist. So look how successful that's been. People believe that to this day, that race is real. Terrifying. And then when you come to your ancestry, which part of it at least is started in Asia, that's a bloody continent. It's not even a so-called racial group, right? Asian includes people of Indian, South Indian descent. It's so absurd as to make you want to laugh out loud. And then you get Hispanic, which is a language category, right? And then you've got indigenous, you know, talk about indigenous people. Well, indigenous people are also Hispanic people who are also white people. I mean, the thing gets more and more crazy, right? So then what you've got here is you've got this race, which is a system created, which separates. These people are advantaged by this system, and these people are oppressed by the system. But here's the thing, these people were persuaded the color of their skin is more important than their economic interest. Because their economic, go back to cultural hegemony, their economic interest is not served by us being separate, is it? In the last 35, 40 years, the difference between the rich and the poor has grown so enormous that the heads of industry are now making about 400 times more than your average worker. 400 times more than your average worker. It used to be much less than that. So this thing is completely out of control. And we need to be holding hands with folks who come from different communities in order to begin to think about a different economic system. So then where does ethnicity fit in? Well, if you've got these enormous racial groups, and I'm only going to do the two main ones, original ones, which were black and white. Within these groups, you've got ethnic groups, right? So they've been sort of generalised now, but you've got, in Nigeria, you've got Yoruba, in England, you've got, or in Britain, you've got the Welsh, and so on, right? So these are different ethnic groups because they share cultural things in common. And let's extend this now to, let's say, let's bring in Asian just because Newsland is here. And let's say here we've got Hmong, here we've got, I don't know, give me another Asian, let's say Indian. That's difficult because you've got caste and that's so very complicated. But anyway, so these groups are distinct in some sense because they've got different cultural traditions and different languages. And they have a piece of land that they're related to. But they're not race. They're distinct small communities. And some of you have got numerous ethnic groups that you're related to. Have you got more than one?
I have like English and Native American and stuff like that.
So multiple,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I mean, and most of us have. Have you got more than one?
No.
No. So most of us have, but of course you don't know, because back in the day, the Hmong probably interacted with a whole bunch of people in their descent from northern China down to Thailand and Vietnam, right?
Yeah.
Who knows, you know, I mean, it just, maybe the identities, but do you see where I'm going with this? Some ethnicity has some value, although if you went to the Pacific Islands, they might say to you, oh, actually, you know, you come to live here, you are now a member of our community, and it wouldn't matter that you look like Rachel, right? Because you've then adopted their culture and they've accepted you. So in other words, that can be a little bit more complicated depending on where you are as well. So you're frowning. Are you frowning? Does
No.
it make sense?
Oh, yeah, no, I get
So
it.
you get it, okay. All right, no, but I mean, I think this is kind of, if we can get our heads around it, you can go to England, you can see these different groups you're going to hang out with. They're all distinct, well, not distinct, but they're all overlapping ethnic groups. You know, we keep talking about race because it's so much a part of the way we live our lives, but there is, you went into a school and you've got black kids, they are as diverse between them as if you're white, you're diverse between. Like, imagine if somebody came up to Nushla and said to you in Mandarin, you'd say, what? Unless you speak Mandarin, do you?
No.
No. And you'd say, how on earth is it that you can just assume that I am, because of some, you know, and look at the Japanese during the Second World War. You know, they looked like the enemy, so they were interned. Someone of German descent didn't get interned. So it's like how race and ethnicity all get, you know, piled on top of each other, so it becomes more and more complicated. Questions for me? Has that made any sense? So really, really, really important when you go to England, though, that you think this through, right? Because it does a lot of online. You're going to have 3, or maybe it's more than 3 films that I put there. I want you to try and see if you can see them before you go. It's from a series called Race: The Power of an Illusion. I think I talked about showing it to you at some point. I put them all online. If you can look at them, start with number 1, which is about the genetics of it all, and how ridiculous it is, and then the history, and then the social consequences, which goes up till 1960s or 1970s or something like that. So give you some idea about how that played out in the fairly recent past. I wish more people had some sense of this, because we might be going, I'm not saying that we should get away with racial categories in terms of research now, because we have to know how people are doing in school. But at the same time as we're finding out, we've got to start changing this whole dynamics. Okay, so now, what do you want to do now? How much longer have you got? Do you want me to go over the paper? That was my next thing. Or are you feeling all right about it? You've read the guidelines, right?
I will.
Here are the guidelines online. thing that I want, this is so important for you to know, is when you go over there and you start taking notes on that template that I've given you. On the left-hand side is your observations, detailed observations, even stuff you think, this is never going to be useful to me, right? Just write it down. Even if you're out there, you know, so you're not even in school, your informal ideas when you're in London or something, if you've got a little notebook with you, just to write down some ideas, right? Because, you know, we're over there. I do want you to look at neo-colonialism, right? I do want you to look at cultural hegemony. I do want you to try and understand race and social class. Social class is huge in England, right? People here don't talk about social class. Over there, people are very proud of being working class. Very proud. You said to a Cockney in London, you know, well, are you middle class? He'd say, no, what the hell are you talking about? I'm a working class man, you know. They'd be very proud of it. So don't, you know, be careful with that. You might not work. So, I mean, you know, the thing that in England, I have a middle class accent. So if I were to, a lot of the Cockneys in London would be a little suspicious of me and who I am. It's a challenge. I have a lot of my friends who have Cockney accents. I've had to work hard at that relationship, just like you may have had to work hard at relationships with people from different ethnic groups because of all these stereotypes that abound, right? So you're going to do this. Now, I want you to keep in your mind, though, these 7 categories. You go online and you look at them. I'm going to read them to you now so you remember. The first one is about your own biases. Well, doing that performance indicator is going to help with that because you'll know where you stand on these different things, right? But also, please write this down. Before you go, I want you to write down what your stereotypes might be about the following student populations. First of all, Pakistani. Have you got a piece of paper? Do you want one? You were doing it fast, okay. Pakistani. Indian. I'm just going to generalize and say Arab now, because there'll be a number of different Arab populations that you may meet, right? Muslim, which of course is a religion and not an ethnic group, but I want you to write down what you feel about that, right? Then I'm going to generalize again, and I'm going to say African, and by that I mean, but you should say West African. That I mean Nigerian, Sierra Leonean, Ghanaian, any of those different populations, right? And then you're likely to meet a few folks from Southern Europe, so write down Portuguese and Cypriot, which is people from Cyprus, and Greek, as in Greece, and Italian. Those are the Southern European populations. And then, of course, lastly, you know, your white British population. Oh, no, we've got to put Irish down, haven't we? Especially for people who are going over there. A lot of Brits are of Irish descent, including me, in part. And then, you know, the other English people that you're going to meet. Oh, and you better add French to that because we're going over that. So you need to literally do that. There's one population I haven't mentioned, I'll mention in a minute. You need to literally write down somewhere where you have enough space and write down what your assumptions are about these people and be as honest as you can, right? Even if it is a really egregious stereotypes, I don't care. It's part of a system. This is not about you as an individual. Some of these ideas come to you without you even trying. Am I making sense? They're in the air that you breathe. So make sure that you identify them, because then when you meet them, then you can begin to realize just exactly how crazy that system is. Does that make sense? The last group you're going to write down is Mauritius or Chagos Islanders. This is a huge population in Crawley. The Mauritian lot of these guys, well, not a lot of them, they all, their parents were an ethnic group that lived on islands in the Indian Ocean called the Chagos Islands. They were part of Mauritius, which is the bigger island close to East African coast, right? And in the 1970s, have I told you this already? The Americans said to the British, who had colonized these islands, we want a military base in the Indian Ocean. Can we have these islands? And the Brits said, sure, no problem. It was no problem for them. It was a bit of a problem for the Chagos Islanders because they had to get out of Dodge. They didn't want them. So they initially sent them to Mauritius, which is this big island, but Mauritius didn't have the resources to look after an influx of people from the Chagos Islands. So where do you think they went? Which was the colonizer? Britain, right? England. So they sent them there. So these people with these hot islands in the Indian Ocean ended up in Crawley, which is where you're going, right? So the huge number of Chagos Islanders, they have been treated so badly. Again, when Patrick was at his school, he'll tell you loads of stories about their experience. They're beginning to settle in now. This is more than one generation. The parents were first, and a lot of these kids were born there. But still, some of their stories are really problematic. I can't ask you what do you think about the Chagos Islands. You haven't got a clue because you don't know who they are, right? But the other populations, I think you can identify. But just bear in mind that these folks, you're going to meet a lot of them. A lot of them will say, I'm Mauritius, because their parents were already in Mauritius when they came, but they can trace back their origin to the Chagos Islands. It gets curiouser and curiouser, right? So that's your biases. Then the evaluation of the teaching context including culture, language, race, social class, gender, and other categories of difference. So how has race and cultural hegemony and so on impacted the schools? You're going to ask yourself. The next one is how the students are impacted by relationships with their teachers. We're not going to have enough time to look at this, but just a little bit. You can ask them too. Classroom and school discipline and other policies. And then the resources needed for planning effective multicultural teaching. And then the B ones are about curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment. As you take notes about this, you're going to then categorize them in terms of Nieto's level. So the lowest level is monoculturalism, which is the dominant, the dominant culture defines everything. If you find that an awful lot of what you see in schools when you're writing it up is at the bottom levels, there is a space for you in the write-up, number 7, I think it is, where you can write down what you would do to make the schools more multicultural, because the rubric is asking you what multicultural education looks like. Does that make sense? And if you don't see very much of it, you're going to have to say, this is what I'd do, or this is how this could be changed. But you've got to first of all identify what it is before you can say what it should be. And we'll talk a lot about how it could be different when we're over there. Unfortunately, we don't have that conversation until you know what you're looking at. And the other thing that you've got to do here is you're going to have to come up with your own question, because then it'll make this very real for you. So say you fall in love with the Chagos Islanders and you think they're so, creative, they're drummers, they're amazing folks, and you begin to think, I really would like to ask a question about their background. That could be your personal question, and then you need to find your article that we talked about earlier would be about them. It would be an answer to your question. And then where would you write this up? Well, you'd write this up somewhere in here. It's definitely going to fit. And I have given you a this is all about how you write your paper. I mean, it's very prescriptive. I hope you like that, right? It's very structured. So literally, if you follow this, I'm going to talk about it again, obviously, when we're over there, you can't fail as long as you've got enough data. I'm not going to print this out for you. It is online. You can have a look at it. But please make sure you know what you're doing before you get there, all right? That was awfully quick. Any questions? about that.
I
Yes,
just have more of like a general question. What exactly are we like doing? Like, what does our time in the schools look like?
so we're only going 4 times because we've got so much else to do. And it depends, to be honest with you. And one of the schools, you'll get a chance to sit down and talk with the principal. So you have to ask questions about all of this. All right? I've given you some questions online. You would ask questions to answer your performance indicator. The school that I mentioned where it's all laid on for us, I'm not 100% sure what she's got planned for us, but I think she's probably going to sit down and she's Pakistani herself, and I think she's probably going to try and introduce you to some of the culture shock that a lot of the kids experience when we're over there. And then you'll hopefully be able to follow some kids into classrooms, right? But we really don't have a huge amount of time, so when you're there, take advantage of that.
Is the plan to kind of pair up with your own subject?
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. It's proving to be really quite difficult. And some of you may be paired up with a white English kid, but that's fine, right? You just ask questions of that kid. The reason why I say it's proving to be difficult is because it's the end of the year. And an awful lot of the schools are saying, oh, we don't need you right now. We're trying to finish off our semester. But these kids that we're hoping to pair you off with, a bunch of them are Chagos Islanders, and a bunch of them are, they call them city leaders or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but anyway, they're the leaders in the student community. And I know, as is inevitable, a lot of them are going to be white because, you know, schools have suited them better, so they become leaders. So we're trying to intersperse, you know, some of the Chagos Islanders with some of the white English kids. Does that make sense? So you will have some of those kids, and maybe they've got friends that they can, you know, maybe one afternoon they can take you somewhere to meet some other kids. We are, this journey is always a little bit of improvisation because you're never quite 100% sure what you're going to get. But that's fun, right? Not to have everything too scripted. Any more questions about that? Let's just quickly go over this. These are your assignments. So you've got the formal observations. You've got the mapping. So when you've done your formal observations, you're going to color code those according to NIETO's levels and map them. But I'm going to go over that with you. So when we're over there, so we'll wait until you've got some notes, all right? And then I'll show you. I talked about the academic article, which is going to help you make sense of your personal question. The research paper, just went over that.
That's the ESA then technically, right? Okay, that's what I figured.
Yes, sorry, I do that sometimes. I don't always call it exactly the same thing. The performance indicator, you got that, I gave you a copy of that. The readings, so NIETO is the first one, and then you've got all those readings that you're not going to panic about and say, oh God, she wants me to do 50 readings. No, I want you to do as many readings as you can, but you're only going to write notes on 5, and one of them is NIETO, right? Post those online. There is a concepts test right at the end for some of the major concepts in the course. It's only 10, multiple choice, should get 10 out of 10 for that. And then when we do our strategic interactions, there will be a form that you will fill out and you will evaluate yourselves on that, how well you felt. So it's very like the performance indicator, just a simplistic version of that. Because the questions won't be exactly the same as the performance indicator. In fact, we'll decide on the questions together. So, what else do we need to do? Questions about the trip?
So I know you sent out an email with our tickets attached.
Yeah.
Are we supposed to print them off? Because I couldn't find it.
All you're going to need at the airport is your identification.
Okay.
Unless something's radically changed, just your passport, you should be just fine.
Okay.
And you're all going through together anyway. So, and Babatunde will have a copy of that with him. Oh, and also the other thing is I'm going to, I wonder if I could do that now. Do you want, I think I better print it out for you before you go. I have letters from the Dean and from the School of International Education for each one of you, just in case. All right? Because I just want to be as careful as possible. I can't give it to the folks that are at the other end of the phone, so I will email it to them. But don't you think it might be better if I print it out for you now, especially if you're coming from Ireland? So I'll do that right now. But before I do that, let that be the last thing. Any more questions? You look like you're about to ask something. No? How are you feeling about what's been happening in Britain? Nobody brought it up.
Everybody keeps talking to me about it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
I've been way too busy with this, or maybe I should look into some stuff.
No, I think you've got to know the British a little. They're not going to let this change their way of life. That's not who we are, right? We refuse to be afraid of these lunatics. You're still much more likely to be run over by a car when you leave this building than you are to be caught in something like that. We're not crazy. We're not going to put you anywhere where you're going to be in danger. When we walk around London, we'll keep our eyes open, but I cannot imagine that anything is going to happen to us while we're over there. I just want to put your minds at rest, or maybe more your parents' minds at rest.
Well, even like I was talking to my mom about, and she was like, Hannah, they would never let you go if they were
Yeah,
worried.
Exactly.
You know,
We were saying that
so.
they would have already canceled the trip if
Yeah,
they were worried.
exactly.
It's not going to happen. And as I said before, part of what we're doing as human beings in this world, certainly human beings that are part of a democracy, is saying, how do we need to act in order to make sure that the quality of our way of life is not compromised by these lunatics, right? One of the ways is to go over there as usual, right? And to meet with the people who come from the same background but are completely and utterly opposed to what's been going on. And then you can come back and spread the word over here, because there's so much fear over here. And the people who, they said that Ariana Grande concert in the same place. What was it, yesterday or the day
Yeah,
before?
yesterday.
Yeah. I mean, that was a lovely touch, right?
Yeah, they had it like streaming live on like some of the TV channels
Right.
here. They had like a bunch of like UK artists
Right.
doing stuff, and it was really cool. And like I was just looking on not a hugely reliable source, but BuzzFeed was like talking about it, and they're posting like all this stuff of like people in London that are like rallying together. Like people are like on Twitter like saying that they have extra rooms. Cabs are giving like free car rides. A dude rode his bike for 3 hours just to bring water to cops that are like stationed all in London.
Right.
So it was really cool.
People are really pulling together.
Yeah, and they have caught 12 suspects or more.
Right,
So
right.
they're
And it might be useful for us to have a conversation over there about where this craziness comes from, because the British asked for this, if you like, a little bit, because when they colonized the Middle East, way back, the early 19th century with the French, you don't go into someone's place and divide up their land and, use their resources and stuff and not expect that somewhere down the road something like this is going to come back to haunt you. You just don't do it. So, I'm not to even begin to justify something like this, but we have to try and understand what's going on, right? Because that's the only way you change it, is by understanding. So, a lot of people said to me, well, but that does, of course it doesn't justify it. A lot of people have been oppressed and they don't go around stabbing people or running them over in vans and stuff. But when you're talking about the lunatic fringe, think how few there are, that are part of this. The lunatic fringe, that's what they do. But we're not going to meet any loonies. So let me go do these letters for you, right? And I'm going to get you, there'll be 2 each. Is anybody taking for anyone else or not? Just for you. Yeah, you're not going to see any of the others who aren't here. No? Yes, no?